condo and HOA fraud has been overlooked for a long time because of that. It was considered a civil matter. You'd call the police and they'd come in and give you a case number and say, go get an attorney. And the truth is, the police departments were not equipped to handle these cases. And then the association attorney benefits from the infighting, right? Because they're billing billable hours. So the fact that you as an owner are asking questions and going and looking for documents, they're okay with that. But the truth is, it's been overlooked for a very long time. And it wasn't until the police and the state attorney's office really got involved. And they too, down here, the state attorney's office was victim of, in the Hammocks case, they themselves were denied subpoena access. They were denied access to records. So it wasn't until it happened to them that people started realizing that this is a problem.
Had enough of excessive fines, selective enforcement, and nosy Karens? Welcome to the Association Nightmares podcast. If you're tired of being pushed around by your HOA or condo association, you've come to the right place. Property owners, get ready to take back your power. And now, here are your hosts, Ann and Mark.
Welcome to the podcast. So today we're joined by Tamara Reyes, the founder and president of South Florida Property Owners Consulting. She recently retired as a sergeant from the Miami-Dade Police Department after 29 years of service, including time on the Economic Crimes Bureau. Dedicated to justice and victims' rights, Tamara earned numerous accolades throughout her career. She worked closely with agencies like the Secret Service, the FBI, Homeland Security, and ICE, ensuring proper allocation of government funds and participating in operations targeting fraud and corruption. Her work included organizing and leading arrest sweeps against organized crime. Today, Tamara helps property owners to bring criminal board members to justice and much more. Tamara, thanks so much for joining us today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure.
It's our pleasure.
Tamara, could you start by telling us a little bit about your background as a detective and how you transitioned from being a detective to investigating HOA and condo boards and related crimes?
The last 9 years with the Miami-Dade Police Department, I was the administrative sergeant for the Economic Crime Bureau. And somehow, somewhere around 2017, property owners started going to Tallahassee and petitioning for some changes. They wanted more owners' rights. They wanted to make sure that there was transparency within their boards. And they did get some very good changes. The problem is that government is reactive. So when these people came back, there was nothing in place to ensure that these laws were being followed. There was nothing in place to ensure that the police departments were equipped to handle these allegations of fraud or suspicions of fraud. So when I worked in the police department, I had absolutely nothing to do with condo and HOA. That unit was put in place in 2018, and I retired shortly thereafter. But after my retirement, my mother went through an issue with her HOA. And it wasn't until I lived her nightmare that I realized how broken the system actually was. So I had a lot of experience. I had a lot of friends that had retired that were sergeants, lieutenants, and above that had been in economic crimes or investigations for a long time. And I reached out to them and said, listen, there's an issue here. Would you guys consider helping me? And we established in 2018 and have been going strong ever since.
Yeah, let's dig in a little bit deeper to your personal story. What happened with your mom? Because I'm in this because of what happened with my mom. And so tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, in her particular case, they had implemented a special assessment of, I want to say somewhere between $700,000 and $750,000 for new roofing, which they did complete that task. But it was tile roof that should have a lifespan of 25, 30 years. And my mother had a background. She worked in a roofing company for 20 years. So she knew roofing. And 5 years later, they attempted to do another special assessment, this time for $2.5 million to replace the same roofs.
Oh, wow.
So my mother had an issue with that. They're townhouses. And she had an issue. She went to the county. She had county inspectors come in and try to see if the roofs indeed needed repairing. No one was complaining about anything. And I started seeing her requesting documents, being charged hundreds of dollars every time that she was requesting documents because they charge her by the page. You'd call her, and at 2, 3 in the morning, my mother was putting together Excel spreadsheets. And it wasn't, the truth is that I was very ignorant at the time. And my response to her was, why don't you just sell? And she's like, I lived here for 35 years. This is my home. It's paid for. But who's going to help out these other people that have no knowledge? And then I'd say, well, go to the DBPR. And she said, they don't do anything. So it wasn't until I saw exactly what she was saying, that the DBPR wasn't receptive. They weren't equipped to handle a complaint of possible fraud. And that I said, we need to get involved. And the truth is, my entire staff, with the exceptions of the accountants, are all retired law enforcement officers, 27, 29, 30, 35 years. So we just had so much experience that just sitting there and not doing anything and not doing anything to help people would have been a waste. So it's almost like my law enforcement experience prepared me for this. And now, this is what I believe I'm meant to do, is assist homeowners, because it's a humongous problem, something that has been overlooked for many, many years.
Yeah, and as Mark and I do more and more research, because of what's happening, I think that most of the homes now being built are being built in associations around the country, and these are just being replicated. So even if you want to sell and move out, your options there just aren't that many. And if we don't correct the system or stop it, we're going to find ourselves in a position where, we'll basically be prisoners in our own home. So it's a big problem. And what I've also found is that once people are injured by the system, once they go through it and are victimized by the system, it changes you completely because it wakes you up. And that's basically how Mark and I got into it. And we're not the only ones. I mean, thank goodness we have you, but there are lots of other people who are starting to complain. And we just want to bring this out so that our elected officials know that this is a real problem and we need real effective change. So again, thank you. Now that you're doing this, I wanted to ask you, do you see any kinds of patterns in HOAs and condos? Is it the special assessments that kind of trigger red flags? Because even though I'm living in a community, I don't have access to information unless I request documents. So if I really don't know what's going on, if you don't know, you just don't know. But are there like red flags that people can look for in associations?
So I'll tell you this. The trigger is not the special assessment. The problem is that people have never gotten involved. As long as their maintenance fees doesn't go up, or it goes up $10, $15, they don't attend the meetings. So all of these things have been happening on the back end. We just didn't know about it. And then what happens? If money's misappropriated, or there's someone embezzles money from the association, now there's a deficit. So now they have to come in and implement the special assessment, and people are like, oh my God, what's going on? But the truth is, the building hadn't been painted in 15 years. The pool's been closed for 5, but their maintenance hadn't gone up, and nobody's been looking, and everybody's been busy with life. And then because there's 1 or 2 homeowners that are the ones that are actively asking questions, attending meetings, they're considered pests. And, they're discarded, and, you're causing a problem for the association. But the truth is, they're doing what everybody should have been doing, is asking questions, going to these meetings, and being involved in some of these decision-making.
That's great advice.
So the only other thing that I would add, when we talk about patterns, every now, and this is my belief from what we're seeing in our cases, they're shifting. So we still have the cases where the board president may embezzle funds, or, go write checks out to cash and cash them themselves. You still have that, and maybe some kickbacks. But the big issue now, and what we're seeing, and this is how I figure that in the future, this is just the new form of economic crimes, is because of these assessments. Right now, associations with 7, 10, 20. I even have one association with $34 million assessment. So now these contractors you need to get that job. So what's the easiest way is to offer kickbacks to these board members in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so this is going to be now the new pattern. You just have to do it once or twice and you're going to come out. I mean, we're seeing association presidents clear about $500,000 worth of debt in 18 months where they've always had a mortgage. They've always paid special assessment in installments. They've had a car note. And now all of a sudden they paid the $200 and something thousand special assessment. They paid their mortgage. They paid a $90,000 car. And you're looking at this and nobody's been looking.
Yeah. Especially if you don't show up. So Tamara, you talked a little bit about your story with your mom, and obviously that's what that must have been part of what inspired you to get into this as a business. But was there any particular experience that set you forth in this direction, or was it pretty much just your mom, and then from there you're like, yeah, this could be a business? How did it start?
I will tell you, and I had absolutely no intentions of going back to work when I retired. I figured that if I'm going to work, I would just stay longer in the police department. It was a job that I loved. But I will tell you that when the Miami-Dade Police Department implemented that condo fraud unit, you would see people coming in with boxes. Sometimes they'd take the day off, 2 or 3 homeowners. And the truth is, the detectives would say, okay, show me your proof. And they didn't have it. Then they were sent to the DBPR, and then you'd go to the DBPR, and the DBPR, the minute you'd say fraud, theft, any criminal allegation, they'd say, we have no jurisdiction. And the people were being ping-ponged back and forth for years. So the truth is, I had no intentions of doing anything like this. And we haven't seen anybody else doing it. But we just figured that if we get all the resources that we were missing when we worked in the police department and had the accountants and we had the law enforcement experience, at some point we even contracted with retired DBPR employees because they would help us with the DBPR complaints. So we put all the components together under one umbrella to try to help these homeowners.
That's great. I actually came across the same problem when I filed my arbitration petition against my board. That's a whole other story, but it was punted out because of one word in my demand letter, and I got really upset with them. But I did approach the Attorney General of Palm Beach County's office. I did try to file a criminal complaint against the board for fraud. I was told it was a civil matter. So even if I wanted to file a police report, I was told that it wouldn't go anywhere. So there was no place to go except into the courts, which can be very expensive and damaging to an individual property owner. And a lot of people don't have the funds to fight the boards.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that the condo and HOA fraud has been overlooked for a long time because of that. It was considered a civil matter. You'd call the police and they'd come in and give you a case number and say, go get an attorney. And the truth is, the police departments were not equipped to handle these cases. And then the association attorney benefits from the infighting, right? Because they're billing billable hours. So the fact that you as an owner are asking questions and going and looking for documents, they're okay with that. But the truth is, it's been overlooked for a very long time. And it wasn't until the police and the state attorney's office really got involved. And they too, down here, the state attorney's office was victim in the Hammocks case. They themselves were denied subpoena access. They were denied access to records. So it wasn't until it happened to them that people started realizing that this is a problem.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. Property owners, the best way to stand up for your rights is to become a member of USCFAR. Visit us at www.uscfar.com now.
My goodness. So a state attorney requests transparency from an HOA and they're denied.
By their attorney.
Wow.
They requested the subpoena and they were denied the documents.
Wow.
So
So-
we've
yeah.
seen in a lot of associations where a senator will go, we've had city mayors show up at these board meetings, and I mean, they're treated horribly. This is just something that it needs changing in
Yes.
every aspect of this needs changing.
Is there any particular kind of crime or misconduct that are most typically committed by HOA and condo board members? Like what's maybe the top three or even just the top one?
It would be embezzlement and then kickbacks. And the embezzlement of funds, obviously, you have a budget, and if you steal money, there's going to be a deficit in your budget. So what has to happen is they have to come in and put a special assessment in order to be able to cover those expenses, or they'll transfer the money from a reserve account into operation because there's a shortfall. And then, of course, you know, the kickbacks is a big issue because where something might have cost $100,000, now the association's paying $200,000 because they have to provide these kickbacks. And some of these board members will justify it as commission, you know, where they say, I'm doing this for free, and, you know, I should be entitled to this. But this is what's happening. As a matter of fact, I'd be surprised if a contractor would be surprised if someone from the board is not soliciting funds in return for approval of that contract. It's like a normal practice.
Yeah, I think it's expected. I think it's almost like a given. But the property owner doesn't have any way of proving that. That's the problem. You know, in all fairness, we're talking about boards, but you know, we have property management companies that also do embezzling and stuff because sometimes they run the checkbook. Is that true?
Yes, it is. We've had cases where the accountant, recently Miami-Dade Police Department made an arrest on a property manager. She was an administrative assistant at the property manager. It wasn't one of our cases, but what she was doing is she was keeping the security deposits. And I think it was something like $50,000 that they were able to prove. She'd ask for a money order, or whenever somebody was doing their background check or anything, she'd ask for a money order to be left blank, and she was embezzling those funds.
Wow. That's amazing.
Are there any other players in this industry that you know of besides the board and the property management companies that also have access to funds that they embezzle or steal?
No, the only other thing that we're seeing now, and I'm not going to say that it's embezzlement, is we're seeing some of these collection attorneys. What the collection attorneys are doing is, you know, it's almost like inside trading. They know which units are going to go into foreclosure. And what they'll do is they'll go in, establish an LLC, and buy that unit, or one of their associates or a business partner buys the unit for pennies on the dollar, or they'll buy the debt and they'll rent out the unit. I've had one association attorney that purchased 3 units for $10,000, 3
Wow.
contracts for $10,000.
Wow.
And so what they do is, if, let's say, Bank of America is the mortgage holder, what they'll do is when Bank of America is getting ready to foreclose, because obviously the owner didn't pay, they just switch it from one LLC to another, and then the bank now has to start the foreclosure process again.
Wow.
So I'm just curious. I mean, because obviously that's shady dealing. Something like a kickback, is there a particular law that they're violating getting a kickback? Like, what is there a statute? Like, what is the crime that somebody would be charged for in taking a kickback?
Well, what they did now, this last legislative year, is they made the kickbacks a crime. Not only is it a crime, the person that accepts it, but the person that gives the kickback as well. So if you're that contractor and you're giving a kickback to a board member, you're just as guilty as the person that received it.
But before this new legislation was in place, it was not a crime?
Nope.
Wow.
Okay, so we're talking about exchange of money, but what happens when a contractor will go into a board member's home and they do work for them and there's no exchange of money? So
Or
it's just an
they
exchange.
work with a family member, or give money to a
Yeah,
family member with a different last name.
Well, the truth is, the way the statute reads now that they changed it, the truth is it's happening all the time.
Yeah.
But the statute now reads that you cannot get anything, retain anything of service. You can't benefit from any service at all because of your position. But we'll go back to not just that. We've had, because it hasn't been looked at, we've had situations where board presidents in the past would open a lawn maintenance company, and now obviously they're going to award themselves this, and they're making $70,000-$80,000. They're already retired. They get a day worker to mow the lawn, and they're making money. We had one particular case where it was a 3-person board, and the board president, he only needed approval from one more person, decided that they were going to open up a corporation. They fired the valet, they fired the security. This particular building has a lot of Airbnbs, front desk personnel, and he had like an exclusive contract for everything. And when our accountants finished doing the review, he had been paid $2.5 million for those services.
Wow.
And the way that he sold it to the board was saying it's going to be cheaper than paying the valet, this and this. And within 6 months, he raised the price to where now it was a lot more. But you could not, if you rented your unit through Airbnb, you could not even buy a towel from another vendor. Everything had to be done through this corporation.
Wow, that's crazy. So I'm just curious, why do you think, Tamara, that HOAs and condo boards are such fertile ground for corruption and unethical behavior like this?
Exactly what Ann described. For a long time, it's been considered a civil matter. Nobody was looking at these crimes. And people really didn't have the resources to be able to properly investigate them and then report them. You go to your local police department alleging fraud, but you have to show the proof. They're not going to open an investigation because of, your suspicions. You're going to have to show why it is that you suspect that. So for a long time, nobody was looking into these cases, and it became a monster.
So obviously this has been going on for a very long time.
Absolutely.
And I'm just thinking also, it's a law on the books now, but it also, a law that goes unenforced or, only occasionally enforced, might not stop all of that kind of activity if boards are not transparent, if they're able to hide their tracks. What's to stop this kind of behavior from continuing?
That's the biggest complaint that I've heard from people that have tried to hold their boards accountable, is that when they go to the state agencies, when they go to the courts, that there's no enforcement. We have the laws on the books, but who's enforcing them?
Well, I think that you have to have the proof. So we'll go back to why we started, right? It's because we know that a normal homeowner, first of all, they don't even know what to ask for. Oftentimes I speak with homeowners, they come to my office and they'll tell me, because I asked for records. As a matter of fact, I don't even accept records that a homeowner provides me. I'll look through what they have, but I'm going to still do an access to records request on their behalf, because oftentimes those records are incomplete. They don't have everything that you need in order to really look through the books, and these associations know it. We've had many, many cases where a homeowner may ask for a financial statement and it'll have 30 pages. And when we ask for the financial statement, it has 157 pages.
Wow.
Because they know they can give them a condensed version, maybe no bank statements in it. And, they complied. You asked for a financial statement and here, we gave it to you. It's a lot easier for law enforcement to be able to open an investigation is if, instead of you and as a homeowner, if the board comes in, a new board comes in, now they're looking through their documents. Now they have access to all these bank accounts and they see suspicious activity, which is a lot easier than a homeowner because they were never granted access to those documents to begin with.
Correct.
So you just have to have the proof. Every time someone comes to our office, I try to also, besides listening to their concerns, I try to educate them on the process. And the truth is, the foundation is not only asking for documents, is knowing what to ask for and being able to interpret them. Because they'll give
Yes.
it to you, and if you don't know what you're reading, it doesn't matter. And
Right.
I often tell people that that's so important, because even though it's very difficult for associations to change the bylaws, it just takes one board meeting for them to establish rules and regulations. So for example, and now you come in and you ask for records, and next month you ask for records again, and next month you ask for records. They'll have a board meeting and say, a unit owner is only entitled to ask for records twice a year, or you
Yes.
can't ask for the same records. Well, the issue was that the first time your records were incomplete, you just didn't know it. So that's a tactic that they use. Unfortunately, the state statute says that as long as they establish reasonable rules, which is a word to be interpreted
Yes.
in
That's the litigating word right there.
So
Yeah.
that's the word that they use, and these are reasonable rules.
Mm.
So now what happens? This homeowner who had good intentions, and really their intentions was to look through and see, now is blocked. So a year later, they come, they hire us, and it takes us 9 months to get those documents, because they established those rules as a result of that homeowner continuously asking for records. So if a homeowner is going to ask for records, you need to ensure that you know what you're entitled to, and you know what it is that you're looking for. I also say that because oftentimes people come to my office, they ask for 7 years worth of records, because that's what the state statute had. And then they come and say, well, they put me in a storage room with 300 boxes, and I'm not going to copy that, or I'm not. And every time they tell me, I'm like, when you asked for those records, how did you think you were going to get them? You know, are you prepared to be able to scan those documents or pay for copying? So unless you're prepared for that, and unless you know what you're asking, before you put that request, you need to educate yourself on what that process is going to entail.
Yeah, it sounds like the kind of investigation of any corrupt organization. They can just overwhelm you with paper. They can hide information. So if you're, I mean, as somebody who was a detective in an economic crimes unit, this is what you do. This is what you're expert at. And most of us homeowners, we're too busy with our lives, with our work, with our family, to be able to face something like that. Mom, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I have a comment and I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
So in my case, we did ask for documents because we were building a case. And we have an office on site. And when we had requested documents originally, we just walked in, we paid for copies, and we took them home. The second time we asked for additional copies, they told us that the board had decided that we could no longer go to the on-site office. We had to travel down to the management office, which was in Deerfield, which was 22 miles round trip, in order to get the documents. And I said, okay, that's fine, but I want to see the originals. I don't want to see facsimiles. And when we got down there, they gave us facsimiles, which can be changed. You can take an original, make a copy, and change it. And I checked the statute, and the statute, unfortunately, does not say that you are entitled to original documents, which I think is really not good. That really needs to be taken care of. But they did this to basically make it difficult for us. Now, I went down with my partner. He's a little older than I am, and we're both still driving. But there are people here that are into their 90s who really can't do that. So they're basically denying them access to information that's right on site. So that's the point that I wanted to make. But let me ask you, when you're hired by some property owners to go into the board and ask for documents, have you gotten pushback from the boards as a company, as a representative of the homeowners?
We've had very little. So we've had cases where they didn't respond, or they responded and didn't provide us access, maybe 1%. And we've had cases where my staff has been inside of a storage unit where they had to stack up the boxes and make like a makeshift desk and go next to the dumpster and get a chair in order to scan documents. I mean, to the point that they had to, the manager or the person on site had to cut the lock because they didn't even have the keys to that storage unit. So talk about people not having access or them not even knowing what's in there. So we've had a lot of, sometimes we have obstacles. Sometimes they'll send us to an attorney's office. I had an attorney one time put an hourglass in front of me and say, you have an hour. So when we go there, we're prepared. We take multiple high-speed scanners. We take multiple computers. We take USVs. We use the restroom before. We take water and extra water because we never know what the conditions, sometimes we've been in rooms that are 100 degrees and we think they do it on purpose. So they might still provide us access, but it's not pleasant. And then we've had other ones where it's been very nice and, the people talk to us. They usually sit somebody there to watch you. So we never know. So we always prepare for the worst scenario, because the last thing I want is for my staff or myself to go to a retrieval and we're unprepared for whatever they're going to throw at us. And then we have to come back to the owner and saying, listen, we were unable to accomplish this. But I think what we have seen is that the way they react and respond to us is a lot different than what they respond to the homeowner. We've had homeowners that had attempted to get documents many times and were unsuccessful, and then they hired us and we were able to get them. And we've had homeowners that will hire us only to get the documents every year. And we're like, why? Why can't you do it? And they're like, because what they give you guys and what they give us are two totally different things.
Okay, so now you've gotten all this information and you have a chance to look at it. And let's say based on what you've seen, you actually see that the information doesn't jive. So take us forward in that process. Do you take it to a point where you actually think that there is embezzlement or there's a crime there? And what's your next steps?
So once we retrieve those documents, it goes to our accounting team. We have 4 separate different sets of accountants, and depending on who's available, it'll go into their queue. And also sometimes it depends on what we believe the allegation is. So there might be one accountant that's better at looking at some things than another one. They're all different. And what they do is they input that information. That takes months because we literally input it by hand. And they input it into Excel spreadsheets. And then the next step is having a meeting with the client. And what they'll do is they'll present a PowerPoint presentation to the client, showing them who got paid, how they got paid, how much they got paid, when they got paid. We go through every vendor. We go through individuals. We go through if there was reimbursements for board members, because you guys living there are a best source of information, right? You're going to say, wait a minute, that's the president's brother-in-law that owns that company. Or wait a minute, this person. So that gives us a direction of where we have to look. Obviously, when we start seeing how the association funds were spent, we'll start concentrating on particular vendors and comparing the contracts to what they actually got paid. We had one particular case where it was a landscaping company. I always make reference to it because it was just so exaggerated. And they had a $46,000 a year contract. When the accountants finished the review in 5 years, that this client wanted a 5-year review, they had actually gotten paid $968,000, $700,000 more than what the contract said. I mean, for landscape, it's not like you're building a building or anything like that. So obviously now that gave us, it gave us an idea of which vendors we needed to focus on. And that particular vendor, when we went back to ask for the invoices, they recreated the invoices. And we knew that because if you ask me right now for a copy of an invoice from 3 years ago, it's going to look exactly the same as it did 3 years ago because I'm going to go in my system and print it. Well, what he did is he addressed it to the current property manager, not the property manager that was there years prior. So at the time, when a client comes to us, we obviously listen to their concerns, but often what we find are things that we never knew. We never knew existed. The client didn't know, they didn't know about that landscaper. So that's our next step. And when the accountants do that review, we call it an observation meeting. After that, we go back to the association and we do another records request. And now we need supporting documentation. Now we know exactly who got paid and how. So we're going to need backup information for this check, for this check. We're going to need the contracts for this. So now we go back, and that's our second step. We're also at the same time going through all the credit card charges to see if these are association expenses. You know, we've seen things at Royal Caribbean cruises. We've seen tickets to Adrian Arch. When you're looking at these things, you're in disbelief, and this is happening, and no one in this building is knowing about it. So that's how we start building our case. And I always say it's like a funnel. We start real big, and then we start zeroing in on what we think we can prove. If we have enough to take it to local law enforcement, we work that case the same. We have private investigators that'll do the background checks. We'll go and do some preliminary interviews. And then when we go and sit down with a local law enforcement agency and present the case and give them a list of what items need to subpoena, why we believe that this was a crime or why we believe that this didn't actually occur. And then it's up to them. And then if they need additional information, they'll come to us. And then at the time that it goes to trial, the state attorney's office will depose us and will be part of the trial. Every single case that we've taken to law enforcement, with the exception of one, has always pled out. And what we're seeing is 10-year reporting probation. They have an adjudication of guilty. They have to pay back. There's restitution. So they'll have to reimburse association, and that adjudication of guilty will ensure that they can't be on a board again.
In your experience, have you found that is it multiple people on the board in collusion? Is it like a rogue board president who kind of keeps everything close to his vest and doesn't let the other board members know what's happening? What's the pattern that you're seeing there?
Yes, I believe that it's usually one person or two, the president and the treasurer, you know, the two people with the signature, the checkbook. And oftentimes there's people on the board, directors, and sometimes vice president. They don't even know what's going on. The people that were placed there because they know that they're not going to ask any questions. And there's just two people that are running that board and making all decisions.
And signing the checks.
Checks.
And
So it's access to the checks and the credit cards. Those people are the ones that we have to watch.
I'd also, I don't ever recommend that there be a board with only 3 people. I know smaller communities, their bylaws would say that. And when I see 3 people and self-managed, that in itself is a red flag for me, because they have no accountability to anybody else, and all you need is one other person. We just recently signed with a client where it's 3 people on the board, and it's a husband and wife, and they own 1 unit. Out of the 3, 2 of them are board members.
So they can do whatever they want with that association. Tamara, can you share an example of just one particularly shocking or impactful case that you've investigated?
I have many, but we had one particular case that went to law enforcement, and law enforcement did nothing, so they came to us. And by the time we started doing the financial analysis, we had discovered that the President Association had a debit card. And until 2018, that was permitted. So he would go to the ATM, same ATM at Chase Bank, 2 to 3 times a week and withdraw the maximum. He was withdrawing, within those 3 years, he withdrew $96,000. I mean, you're looking at these transactions. We have Excel spreadsheets, and the accountant would just put as a justification cash on hand, which just sickens me. But we also found, because it was a new board that hired us to investigate the previous board, is they gave us access to the bank accounts. So when we were looking through all the check images, we found that many times what the president would do is sometime during the month, he would write a check out for $1,000 to cash. It was signed by him and endorsed by him. But when you looked at the financial statements, it indicated that that check was written to a corporation. So obviously at the end of the year, you'd look and say, oh, we spent $12,000 this year in lighting, but there was no lighting. It was all the president writing those checks to himself, or he'd write them to individuals that you could never find. They were non-existent. He'd only put the first name in the financial statements. So besides the $96,000, he embezzled $1,000 a month for the 3 years. So an additional $36,000. And the funny thing about that story is that he wasn't paying his maintenance. So it's not like, besides all that, he wasn't paying his maintenance.
That's nerve. That takes a lot of nerve to do that.
I wonder if he fined himself for that. I don't think so.
No.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. The Association Nightmares podcast is brought to you by the U.S. Coalition for Association Reform. USCFAR is committed to changing how associations are governed by shifting the balance of power to better safeguard and advance the rights of individual property owners. The best way to stand up for your property rights is to become a member of USCFAR. Visit us at www.uscfar.com now.
Let's talk about some of the challenges that you face when you're investigating an HOA or a condo board and the crimes that they're committing. Like, are some cases harder to crack than others? And like maybe compare it to when you were a detective as well.
Believe it or not, the biggest challenge that we have is usually the homeowner. They want weekly updates. They want to know, they've been fighting for so long that they need to be involved. And there's been times that we've gone to request records and the owner's there, where the property manager said either you or them, so sometimes they work against us, or they send us the spreadsheet, send us this, and they want to play detective. But really, it's a hindrance on us because now we have to, no, this isn't a crime. No, that we have to constantly be going back and forth instead of them just trusting the process. But another thing is that not every person that comes to us had a crime committed. There might have been regulatory violations, or it may be something for the civil realm, but it's not necessarily a crime. And sometimes people don't understand that. The magic word in this is the intent. And that's what people have to know, that if this is not intentional, then it's not a crime. So for instance, oftentimes people say, oh, they use the reserve money for this and they use this. Well, the issue is that as long as it's been used for association purposes and not for self-enrichment, it's not a crime. It's a regulatory violation, and they shouldn't have been using reserve money for operation, but it wasn't for themselves. So when you ask me, what do we find? Sometimes it's trying to educate the client as we go through that process and trying to make sure that they understand that we're not going to fix 10 years worth of problems in 2 months.
So you say that intention is important, but that the crime actually happens when they take the funds and use it for themselves personally. Yes. So let's say that there's an assessment that they shouldn't have made, and they use it on common elements, and they misappropriate it. But as long as they don't put that money in their pockets, it's not technically considered a crime.
Right. It's a regulatory violation.
Okay. That's an important distinction. And I appreciate you clearing that up for me.
Yeah.
I also believe that it's important that people understand it. And this is something that I say everywhere I go. You need to know what constitutes a crime. You need to know what constitutes a civil matter and what constitutes a regulatory matter. And until people don't understand the difference between the three, the state attorney's office is going to be bombarded with regulatory people making complaints, or DBPR is going to be bombarded with people making allegations of fraud. So once you learn where you fall, it's a lot easier to be able to get some help in some of these government agencies.
And how could the homeowner learn the distinctions between those three categories? Where would they go to find that out?
Call me. I'll educate them.
Okay. That's the next podcast.
I will educate them gladly. And the thing is that I see the DBPR does a lot of educational seminars and things like that, but I think people don't really grasp the concept. And I talk about that because we talk about the examples, right? You come in and you ask for 7 years worth of documents. What do you want that for? The statute of limitation for theft and fraud is 5 years in the state of Florida. So why are you looking back 7 years? you're not going to be able to do anything with it. Even if we see the crime, the state attorney is not going to prosecute. And also, people have to understand that the state attorney's office is there to prosecute the case, not to do the investigation. So you need to go through a police department to do the investigation, issue a case number, and the police department will go to the state attorney's office because they need to get subpoenas for that case. So they'll work hand in hand to ensure that the state attorney's office has what they need to properly charge, that person.
So over what time period would all of that elapse?
A year and a half. It's a long process. So we'll go back. The statute says that a homeowner has 10 days to have access to records. And although they'll respond to us with the 10 days, it takes my staff 2 to 3 months to get that together, because we go in, we scan, we come back, we download, okay, they didn't give us the bank statement for January, or we see that mid-year they closed 2 bank accounts and opened 3 CDs. They didn't give us the information. So now we got to go back and say, by the way, thank you for giving us, but we're still missing this. And we got to go back and forth. And then once that's done, we don't want to give documents to the clients that they're not going to understand. So now we got to categorize everything, make sure we do proper folders with contracts. In contracts, it's roofing, it's pool. So you guys have all your stuff. So that's with us. And then it has to go through the accountants. If you go to the police department, they open a case number, they do a preliminary investigation. When they ask the state attorney for a subpoena, it's taking 2 to 3 or 4 months to get those subpoenas back.
Wow.
So the process is long, and anything that has to do with numbers is just tedious work. I mean, because one thing will lead to another, will lead to another, will lead to another, and it's not just so simple. So I'd say a year and a half to 2 years. Regardless, even if we can get a case done in a year, it's going to take the police and the state attorney's office another 8 to 10 months to be able to take that through until that person gets arrested.
What was the biggest case that you handled as far as theft? Or fraud?
We had one case that it yielded the President Association. He was arrested. It yielded an arrest. The issue is that some of the things that we know he took, the state attorney's office couldn't prove it. So we want to say that it was maybe $300,000, but he was charged with a lot less. So in that particular case, and when the client hired us and we did an access to records request, we got some pushback or whatever, but going through, that building I walked, I normally don't walk through the grounds, but the client was insistent. And I had seen that they had ordered a Peloton. And since I walked the ground, I didn't see a Peloton in the gym. And they were also paying monthly membership. When I asked for the supporting documentation for the Peloton, I saw that it was delivered to the president's apartment and signed. It was his contact information from Peloton and everything. So that right there was a red flag. We found a lot of other things. They were doing a gym. No, it was a party room and 2 adjacent bathrooms. And I think it was about 900 square feet. And they paid one uncontracted uncontracted vendor $160,000 within 3 months in $10,000 increments. It wasn't even a company, it was one individual. And all the checks were cashed at a check cashing USA. So they paid him just to lay tile $160,000 in 900 square feet. The thing about this particular case is when I took it to law enforcement and I told them, subpoena Costco, subpoena Peloton, I tell them what they have to do. It was also the tile companies, because the amount of tile that they were asking for compared to what the project size was outrageous. And when the police department went and did their interviews, one of the tile companies went on the record and said, we have to give a commission to the president of the board. And here is where we have to give him the money. This is the account that we have to deposit. So that particular association president, mind you, I was looking at the Peloton and I was looking at the things, we knew there was kickbacks, but we couldn't prove them. So when the Miami-Dade Police Department subpoenaed those bank accounts, that president had established a company under his mother-in-law's name. He was nowhere on the corporate docs, but he had signature, and it was a cosmetic company. And what they did there is the vendors, all the contractors or vendors were depositing money in that account. So when the police department subpoenaed that bank account, they saw all of these, the security camera vendor, the towel people, they were depositing money in a cosmetic company that had absolutely nothing to do with the association.
Wow.
So talk about consequences, right? Now, there was a special assessment because there was a deficit of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now there was a special assessment to pay that, to pay all the lawsuits and everything that came with that. So property owners are affected in every way when there's embezzlement of or misappropriations of funds in their community.
Yeah. And I think a lot, I think a lot of property owners are operating under a misconception that it happens in other communities, but not in our community because everybody's so nice when you walk out and say hello to each other. But it happens a lot more. I mean, the case in, I forgot which building it was in.
Aventura.
The guy, Aventura, $1.5 million. That went on for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how he finally got caught? Because I wasn't following that closely.
The Secret Service was the one that did the financial investigation in that particular case. We go back,
Really?
but these agencies don't have the resources to be able to put these cases together. People have to speak up and people have to get involved. And not at the point that there's a whatever, $100,000 special assessment. You got to get involved before it happens because the truth is once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
So Tamara, how do you ensure that when you're presenting your findings, your case to the law enforcement, that you've got everything together so that it has a good potential to lead to legal action or criminal prosecution?
Well, the case wouldn't go to law enforcement unless we know that we have all of the elements to meet the criteria to meet that crime. And every single case that we've taken to law enforcement, and that's been in several different agencies, has yielded an arrest. The same thing, I try not to even do a DVPR complaint. Even sometimes the clients get mad, but if I don't think it's a viable complaint, I'm not putting my name on it. We need to make sure that when we have credibility, when we go to these law enforcement agencies, and we have credibility when the DVPR receives a complaint that has our name, is that we did our due diligence. And from the beginning, from the onset, the day that I meet with the clients, we start building up a case. You know, from that beginning, that's why the access to records is something we submit because we want to make sure that we can establish a chain of custody. The police department's going to subpoena those bank accounts anyways. But the day that we were in court, we say we did an access to records. We went and we retrieved the documents. You know, we want to, from the beginning, make sure that we're a credible witness. So we will not take a case unless it meets every single criteria that we need in order to be able to assist. And even when it gets to the investigative side, sometimes these law enforcement agencies need some help. And we're there to offer. We have the accountants that, you know, they may not have in their particular agency to offer that support and interpret some stuff for them.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm just blown away by what you guys do.
Yeah, and it just seems also that our law enforcement agencies don't have the resources to get this done on their own.
Right.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, people think that if they have another 6 detectives, it'll change. You can have 100 detectives. You need the foundation, you need the accountants, you need the fraud examiners, you need the other people to be able to put the pieces together. And the other issue is, so this has to be fixed, the truth, at a statewide level. I had proposed legislation, I've written it several times and been sponsored by Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez, and I've had state representatives sponsor bills too, Because if you're lucky enough to live in a county where the law enforcement agency has the resources, or at least has a dedicated economic crimes, you have more chances of that allegation being investigated. That if you live in a little city with a police department of 5 officers and no economic crime.
Mhm.
So we need consistency, right? We need
Right.
every crime to be investigated the same. We need every crime to be prosecuted the same. And if you don't have it throughout the state and you live in that little town,
Yeah. You don't
chances
get
are
the justice.
you're not going to get the justice. And the other thing is that oftentimes a lot of these state attorneys, depending on where you are, may not understand the severity or that there is a crime, and they can prosecute this case and they'll tell you it's a civil matter. So it needs to be at a higher level where everyone gets the same treatment. If you have these allegations, as far as the DBPR, and I've been hearing that they're going to have like a fraud unit, you can have 1 million people. If they don't have the investigative background, you're going to have the same 500,000 complaints. Oh, the DBPR is not doing anything. You have to be able to put those cases together, and you have to have the knowledge and background to be able to prove those cases. And so we'll see.
Tamara, could you tell us a little bit about the legislation that you wrote and proposed to the state legislature?
So I asked for a condo fraud pilot program, and again, it died on the floor both years. 1 year, I had a state representative and a senator sponsoring the bill. The issue is, it was like a hot potato. They didn't know where to put it and what it was going to fall under what umbrella. At some point, they talked about FDLE taking it over, and more importantly is, where's the money going to come from? You know, and that's always the big issue in government, is how are they going to fund for this?
Mhm.
But it was just a condo fraud pilot program. I volunteered my services. I would train them. I'll tell you, this is all we do. This is all we've done for nearly 7 years. Let's show you how to do it. And the reason that I say that, it's because it starts at that records request. It starts, the foundation is these documents, and who's going to go and get them? So you need to start to getting those documents, not just subpoenaing the bank statements. And someone needs to be able to analyze all of that information when it comes in, right? Because going back to the example that I gave with the lawn service, all right, so I see the money came out, but unless someone's going to be there comparing these contracts and seeing that they should have only been paid $46,000 a year, there's no crime. So you have to be able to put, just connect all the dots.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. Show up at your next association meeting wearing a t-shirt from ftheboard.com. F the Board has great-looking limited edition t-shirts, hats, and mugs that spur conversation and let you express exactly how you feel while supporting the property rights revolution. Visit ftheboard.com today.
Miami-Dade, I think, is the only county that does have the economic crimes unit throughout the state. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, they have, no. They're the only ones that have a designated condo fraud unit. But economic crimes, the city of Miami has one, Miami Beach has one, Broward had one. I don't know, at some point they disbanded that unit. I don't know what happened now, but Monroe County has. So there's a lot of agencies that have an economic crimes. They're not concentrated.
Yeah.
The specific handling the condo.
Yeah, because Palm Beach County doesn't have one. So obviously you're way ahead of us. And I do think that there's a need for that kind of legislation. Definitely.
I mean, in every aspect, right? Sometimes I see that the state has discretionary funds, and I wish that they would put it to use to help these own homeowners. Like, you have these attorneys that sometimes have to do pro bono work. Why aren't they helping these homeowners with arbitration, writing the DBPR complaints? These are things that people need and you lived through that nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Why not be able to have attorneys help out, homeowners that are in need of simple things, like writing DBPR complaints and following it through, right? Because it's not just writing it.
Yeah.
You got to
Yeah.
get updates and
Yeah.
receipt. And if it goes to arbitration, then the client has to hire an attorney. So why not have these attorneys help these people in these condos?
Yeah, again, I found the same thing because I live in a condominium. My partner and I were on fixed incomes, and so we basically went not pro bono, we went pro se. And so I wrote all the demand letter and the arbitration stuff, and it was thrown out because I used the word immediately, but they hadn't started anything. So there's a disconnect. And that's a whole other thing because the DBPR as a state agency should really be simplified so that I, as a property owner without a legal degree, can simply go in and say, they're breaking the law. Please take a look at this and make a ruling on it. I shouldn't have to hire a lawyer. I shouldn't have to pay an attorney. And then trying to find an attorney, if you fall between the cracks, you don't get the help. So it's a big problem, big problem.
We're making changes little by little. It's a lot.
But I'm going to help you sell that statute. We really need that statute, and that should be under the Attorney General's office, definitely.
I
Absolutely.
agree 100%. I mean, even at one point, the state attorney here, Kathy Fernandez Rondo, she was asking for funds to have designated attorneys just to condo and fraud cases. You can go to any law enforcement agency that has an economic crimes, you'll see how many condo cases are just sitting there because people are coming in, people think, and they come to me all the time because I went here and I went to the police department and I went to the attorney general, and I'm just thinking, that was my world for 29 years. So all I'm thinking, it's sitting in somebody's desk in a box or under the desk, because unless you have the proof, it's not going to go anywhere.
So Tamara, just sticking to our list of questions, we only have 4 additional questions. I think we've covered some of this, but let's get them on tape anyway. So Tamara, for the property owners who are listening, what warning signs should they be looking for that could indicate that their HOA or their condo board is engaged in unethical or illegal activity?
I'd like to say that when you see that the properties are not being kept, that the pool's being closed for 5 years, that they're not cutting the lawn as they should be, that the building hasn't been painted when there's clearly they passed a budget to be able to do this work. That's one sign that tells you right there. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're stealing the money, but something's wrong. Something's wrong in that picture. I think that's the first sign. This is even before your maintenance fees are raised. When you start seeing that the buildings are not being kept. I don't like to see when there's a president on the board for 10 years, 8 years. Why is that happening? Is it that people are not submitting their names to be candidates or to serve on the board? Or is it that they're committing election fraud to continue to stay on the board? And, why would anybody want to do that? Non-paid position unless there's something on the back end. So the first sign should be when you start seeing that your buildings are not being kept,
Maintained.
possibly going up. I immediately want to see where my money's going.
What about, we've got a swath of very large special assessments coming through because of the SB 4D that's coming up, and by the time this podcast airs, those deadlines will have already passed. But we've got huge assessments. I saw a headline, $21 million for one particular condo complex. Do you think that environment of pushing every building that is over 3 stories into that, you've got to get the engineering report, all that they have to do, doesn't that kind of create the additional possibilities for illegal activities as well?
Absolutely. And that's exactly the example that I was giving about how this is now going to start. And this is going to be the new organized crime, because we've had cases that we've seen where the money may not be in the theft may not be in the embezzlement of funds, but we've seen where measurements are exaggerated. For example, we've seen that when the clients hire independent engineer or 3 independent engineers, and they come in and they look at the same information that was submitted, they would show that the railing project was exaggerated by 5,000 feet, or the concrete hundreds of yards more than what they should have asked for. So what's happening there is, okay, you can't find it in the money, but the truth is you should have had 100 yards of concrete, not 1,000 yards of concrete, which now yielded an additional $7 million. So this is what's you're gonna start seeing now. Window companies.
Say again, Tamara.
Window companies now are not even interested in doing houses at $40,000. They want the condo at $10 million window renovation project. You know, this is exactly what we're seeing is, and believe me, when we have these questionable associations and these questionable construction projects, we run backgrounds on these owners, these contractors, people that are serving as project managers that were in bankruptcy 4 years ago, and now they're living in multi-million-dollar houses. The only difference is they secured 2 condo projects. Or you'll see where you'll get a contract, and then when we start looking, there's over 100 change orders. How's that possible? So
yeah, so it really is an environment that's ripe for more nefarious activity. Wow.
Yeah, I think whenever you have a lot, and we checked it, I think the association industry collects multi-billions of dollars a year. This is big business, and I'm in a small community. I think our board basically collected like 1.7 million last year. So it's it's not it's not a little organization. It's big business, and that opens us up to people who are selfish or opportunists.
Big pools of money and not a lot of oversight.
Wow.
So what are some of the long-term consequences for the communities themselves when these crimes go unchecked?
Special assessments, and you'll see a rise in foreclosures because they'll come in, they'll implement a special assessment, and the person on that fixed income can't afford it. I have one client that called me the other day, and as we were talking, he says, Tamara, do you know what my assessment is every month, what my maintenance? And I said, no. He says, $8,000 a month. $400,000 was his assessment for his unit. $400,000.
How much is the unit valued at market value?
I don't know. I don't know his particular unit. I think it's somewhere in the 1.2, but I don't know his particular unit in that.
For sure.
But
that's a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
I mean, think about that. If they were to somebody tell you, hey, your maintenance is going up, I couldn't afford it. I don't know anybody that would be able to just fork out that kind of money.
And then if you want to sell that unit, you have to disclose that to the next person, and no one's going to walk into something like that. So then what happens is the primary owner winds up taking a loss, they turn it over, they walk away, or a developer comes in and buys up the property, which is what we see happening around Florida now.
You're right.
This is a nightmare.
Well, Tamara, how can property owners get in touch with you and your company if they suspect wrongdoing at their HOA or condo board?
They can call us at 305-551-1414 or visit us our website at southfloridapropertyowners.com.
All right. Let me get that number one more time because I didn't write it down.
305-551-1414.
Very good. And looking ahead, what changes would you like to see in the way that HOAs and condo boards are regulated and held accountable?
I'd like to see that word reasonable removed from the statute for a document request. I'd also like to see maybe since associations with revenues of over $500,000 have to go and have an audit at the end of the year, I'd like to see if they can add some provisions for these auditors to maybe identify some red flags. I mean, or report them, right? Not just put in the report, but report them. If you see maybe large amounts of reimbursements to people that are on the board and things like that, I think that if we can capture and we have another set of eyes looking into what's happening, people may not be so prompted to embezzle money from the association. I'd also like to see more regulations, maybe spot inspections at some of these property managers or people from the DVPR getting online and ensuring that all of these associations, they have to have their documents online, are complying, that the documents are there, so you don't have to take that 22-mile trip to go retrieve your documents, to ensure that these things are there.
With a high-speed scanner.
I mean, listen, I'm telling you, we see it every day. So if we don't have to change or add more laws, but if we can just enforce and maybe just add some provisions to the ones that we already have, I think it'll make a big difference. They're always looking for new ways, you know? They do this, oh, but this word says this, so we could do it this way, and we could do it this way. So if we can just tweak what we have there, I think it'll start making a difference.
I think mandatory audits is a very, very good idea. Very good idea, because I think that would stop people from doing certain things.
Well, they're already required if they have revenues of over $500,000 to do an audit, and under that, they do a review. The issue is those auditors are not looking for fraud. So oftentimes people come to the office and say, oh, we had an end of the year audit. Well, every single one of our cases that yielded an arrest had an audit, because the auditors, that's not what they're looking for. So if the state statute can change to make sure that these CPA firms can identify any red flags and report the red flags, not just put it on the report,
Right.
I think that'll make a big difference as well.
Yeah, important nuance.
That's your next legislation.
I'll do it.
I'm there with you.
Well, Tamara, this has been a really interesting and fantastic conversation. The work that you're doing is extremely valuable. As a homeowner and was a former HOA president, and I'm a member of an HOA now. I'm really thankful that there are people like you in the world doing what you're doing, because clearly our law enforcement does not have enough resources to be able to do this work themselves. And most homeowners, we're too busy. We just don't really have the knowledge of how to put this stuff together. And like you were saying earlier, if we present the wrong kind of case to the wrong place, we wind up facing a brick wall, and that could work against us as well. So I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I think that you're really making big strides for homeowners' rights.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for explaining to people what's actually going on, because things are just starting to surface, and people are starting to complain, but you've really taken the lid off of this. And you're right, people have to go to board meetings, they have to stay on top of things, they have to look at the budgets, make sure property's being maintained, and we need to get the government behind us. Definitely. Thank you so much again. I've learned so much today. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank both of you. I appreciate what you're doing too.
Well, maybe we can make a change. That's what we hope.
Thanks for joining the Association Nightmare Podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you again soon.